the internet. Oh, I wanted to do one quick pan of the lake so everybody could see this beautiful setting where we are. Look at that. And here's all these pranksters assembled in Lowell. No, we're not in Lowell, we're in Oswego. I never even know what town I'm in. So I think that ought to do it.
What's going on in Lowell?
The Kerouac celebrations, which will be referenced shortly. All right. Hello, Internet. Hello, Jeannie's happy place. And pranksters galore. So here's a little, my favorite American president who was an author, mixed with the pranksters. It was 200 years ago. Our forefathers and pranksters brought forth upon this continent a new idea, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men and women are created equal and playful. Now we're engaged in a great civil party, testing whether that notion or any great notion so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. And we are met on this great deck of genies, and have come here to dedicate a portion of this year as a fitting respite from the madness of the madhouse of the nation we find ourselves in. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we could not hallow this scene. The brave men and women who pranked before us have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it will never forget what the pranksters have built here. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who first thus painted have thus far so nobly advanced. And it's for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored pranksters we take increased devotion to that cause for which they are still giving the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that Jerry and Jack and Neil and Ken shall not have died in vain, but rather that this prankster land, under all the great spirits, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that movements of the pranksters, by the pranksters, for the pranksters, shall not perish from this earth.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
Thanks to Uncle Abe. Right. Oh, yes, you're asking about Lowell. Well, good timing. So yeah, there's gonna it's Kerouac's 100th centennial of his 100th birthday this year, and so they have these massive celebrations, 5 days long, in his hometown of Lowell, Massachusetts. And so this is a little short description of what those events are like. In the spirit of Jack, a spontaneous love ode just flowed to that thing we do in Lowell. What's cool about LCK is everybody's there for Jack, but on our own terms. Everybody has a completely different relationship with their family member. You'll hear 100 different stories, all by people beaming in front of you, not on your phone, in real life. Radiating energy, coming from Ohio, Ontario, Virginia, because of On the Road or Maggie Cassidy or Dr. Sachs, because of America or Walt Whitman or Dr. Thompson, because of Wanderlust or Adventure or Doctoral Thesis. There's all the guided first-hand tours you want to ride, and historians and scholars next to you wherever you roam, and playful people off the clock just riffing in the beauty of all the assembled happiness. There's non-stop jamming and goofing and hugging interaction. There's a million places to go, both on maps and not. Dr. Sachs's woods, the Merrimack's banks, the cobblestone streets and brick building labyrinths. And all the local Lowell Jacksters come out from all their local hidings for the weekend when they can let their freak flag fly. And everybody's got stories. And you hear Jack lines you've read play back in your head as you walk with a crew of your new best friends, from one scene to another, in places you've only imagined, and some you haven't even. And it goes on for days and days, from the setting sunlit Worthing afternoon of Thursday, leading into the epic bar crawl of Jack joints that climaxes at Cappy's copper kettle of fish, with David Amram riffing Pull My Daisy, until homeboy Bill Walsh's final walking tour on Monday through the secret layers of Pawtucketville, which weaves back to our Worthing clubhouse, where the worthy who made it all the way hoist and toast until the jam is done. It's Jack in the now, not in books, not online, in person, in front of you, right now. Live it or lose it. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to, I have this wild new idea to, I don't know if this is going to work, but to do this for each book I'm reading. Wouldn't that be funny? It's a new idea. Okay, so I know a bunch of us here are mildly partial to the Grateful Dead.
Only a little.
So here's the way Jerry Garcia remembered his transformation into Jack, as captured in the liner notes for the 1990 Rhino re-release of Kerouac's 3 records. Garcia says, I recall in 1959 hanging out with a friend who had a Kerouac record. And I remember being impressed. I'd read his stuff, but I hadn't heard it. The cadences, the flow, the kind of endlessness of the prose, the way it just poured off the page. It was really stunning to me, his way of perceiving music, the way he wrote about music and America and the road, the romance of the American highway. It struck me. It struck a primal chord. It felt familiar, something I wanted to join in, but it wasn't a club. It was a way of seeing. It became so much a part of me that it's hard to measure. I can't separate who I am now from what I got from Kerouac. That's Jerry talking. I don't know if I ever would have had the courage or the vision to do something outside with my life, or even suspected the possibilities existed if it weren't for Kerouac opening those doors. Isn't that something? That's Jerry. And I wanted to add a little yin to all, or a little yang, no, yin to all the yang, in that, so I became friends with a lot of these people, and including Kerouac's first wife, Edie Parker. And here's a little bit from the Hitchhiker's Guide when I first met all these people. So here's a little portrait of Jack's first wife, who was a super cool woman. Jack's first wife, Edie Parker, was the one I could talk to back then, and in fact would grow to become close friends with shortly after Boulder. She even enlisted me to write her autobiography with her, which seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, until I learned she'd already scratched out 1,000 pages and wasn't even up to the part where she met Jack. She was absolutely insistent that every detail of every moment of her life be included. And even at my young age, with this huge opportunity before me, I knew this would be an impossible task, and we'd end up fighting over every detailed description of every piece of clothing she ever wore. So I did not end up joining her on that journey, and we stayed friends instead. Where Jan Kerouac and Carolyn Cassidy were shy and quiet, Edie was a ball of fire, telling stories and relishing the spotlight. Where Jan didn't want to go in front of a microphone, Edie would eat them up, like the 6 sauerkraut hot dogs she ate the first time she met Jack. the story of which she probably told 60,000 times over that week. She was a hoot, a bona fide character, a real pisser, as they called people like her back in the day. A dynamite broad, a catalytic woman, gregarious, a natural chatterbox, a female Neil in her confidence and making the party jump wherever she went. This gathering in Boulder was the first time Edie'd ever appeared anywhere to talk about Jack. But then that was the case for a lot of these people, this being the first major summit and all. But she knew Jack before anyone else who was here, having met him when they were both teenagers in 1939 and falling in love not long after. In fact, she had this whole thing she called the 40s gang, which was just her, Alan, Burroughs, and Hunky, were the core four who predated everybody. Neil, Carolyn, Holmes, Corso, Ferlinghetti, they all came years of youth later. You remember who your oldest friends are, who came first, who dates back the furthest. And same with Edie, acutely aware of who the original group was, and she made a point of reconnecting with each of them, but especially with Hunky, who, for whatever reason, she seemed to dig the most. But then, he would have been my first pick too. First came Edie, who introduced her brainy boyfriend Jack to this cool guy from her Columbia art class, Lucien Carr, who in turn introduced Jack to his life-altering partners in crime, Allen Ginsberg and Bill Burroughs, making it pretty easy to peg the Beat Generation's inception to Edie's introduction and the all-night drinking, talking, and phonograph playing sessions they danced across the universe in the 4 rooms of the Morningside Heights apartment that she shared with Lucien's girlfriend, and then later with Joan Vollmer Adams, who would marry Burroughs. As much as Jack and the Beats were products and practitioners of the male-centric world of the 1940s and 50s, it was almost comically common for the women to be the real catalysts of the creation. It was Jack's mother who gave her grown-up son the love and shelter and stability to write and preserve his manuscripts. It was his last wife, Stella, who mothered him after Mamère had a stroke and was keeping his filing cabinets and archives intact after they both passed away. It was Ann Charters who was the first scholar to take him seriously, and while he was still alive, showing up on his doorstep in 1966 to begin the work that would become his first biography. It was his second wife, Joan Haverty, who had the job that paid the rent on the apartment at 454 West 20th Street that gave Jack the space to write his career-changing scroll of On the Road in that 20-day shot in 1951. It was Carolyn who first moved to San Francisco in 1947, long before Ferlinghetti or any of them, and that's why Neil went there, followed by Jack, Alan, and the domino tumble of history. And it was one wild, fun-loving woman named Frankie Edie Parker from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, who chose to room with a like-spirited woman who would become Mrs. Burroughs, just as she'd be Mrs. Jack, who together hosted the rented Eden from which the entire Beat Generation spawned. Wow. There's Edie Kerouac for you. Thank you. Okay.